Hey friends, I want to let you know as we begin this episode that we currently have 2 spots left for our wine and whiskey trip happening in September. The dates are September 25th through the 27th, and this is in Oregon wine country. This is a trip for the fellas out there, and basically it's a weekend experience designed to create more healthy men, because I think we need that. And so we're creating space for guys to talk about what does it mean to be a healthy version of ourselves? How do we do a better job navigating this role we have? And so if that is interesting to you, this is a weekend of discussion as well as getting to drink wine and whiskey with the people who made it. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's one of my favorite things. We did one last year and I tried it. And it was a big hit. And a number of those guys are coming back on this one. Then we got some new people as well. And we've got 2 spots left. So if that is interesting to you, there's a link in the show notes. You can find out more. We'd love to have you join us. It's an incredible experience and a chance to get away, recharge your batteries, and hopefully get some good perspective with some other guys out there of how to do all this well. So check out our wine and whiskey trip, September 25th through the 27th. Welcome to another episode of Cabernet and Pray, where we sip the wine and we stir the faith. And today's conversation goes all over the place in the best of ways. And so you're just going to have to buckle up because you will not know where we go next, because I didn't know where we were going next. And yet I loved how this conversation traversed all sorts of different specifics and yet had such a beautiful theme of following Jesus in the midst of all of it. It was a conversation with Ben Price. Ben studied economics and political science in undergrad. Then he went to Asbury Theological Seminary to study urban studies and church planting. He went through a deconstruction process and left church participation, but always felt like he was following Jesus through the process. Then he worked in beverage retail as the wine director for the last 8 years at one of the premier independent wine shops in West Michigan. Now he works as the beverage director at one of the premier independent beer retailers in the country. He wrote a book of poetry in 2021, reflecting on his observations of the table and the spirit in the midst of a pandemic. And Ben shares a few of his poems in the episode. He spends his time teaching and gathering people around all kinds of glasses and tables. He is the beer coordinator for the Theology Beer Camp for the 2nd year this year. And that's something we've talked about in previous episodes, and we get into it a little bit in the episode as well. He is the father of 3 kids and the husband to one amazing woman for 27 years this summer. This is such a great episode of someone who is following Jesus well and keeps adjusting to whatever that needs to look like in his life. And I think will be an encouragement for you today as well. This is episode 73, The Feral Spirit.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I have been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my 2nd glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on the show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table. We're going to have a glass of wine and some food. And we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thanks for what you're doing with this podcast and for the creative way you're doing it and the beautiful, positive spirit in which you're doing it.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I've heard about your podcast for a long time, and I love that you're a pastor and that you explore the world of faith through wine. That's very unique.
I never thought of church history in terms of wine drinkers. I love this question. Really got my mind rolling.
You had me with herbaceous notes, I want you to know. I'm ready to just stay here and live in the wine tour.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine.
Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I know why you have your guests drink wine. It makes sense now. Yeah, I get it. A little bit of liquid courage to really unleash the beast.
I think you've got a good podcast. So throw in the wine bit in there. That's nice, doesn't it? Cabernet and Bray, yeah.
Well, today we've got a pastor's kid from the Midwest who grew up to become an expert in beer and wine. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We are going to have a great wine-focused conversation today, and I'm excited for this. So let's start by explaining what's in our glasses. Today,
Sure.
I am going to Oregon. I'm not actually a member of this winery, but this is Lemelson Pinot Noir from their Sturmer Vineyards 2022. It's a Pinot Noir from Oregon, though, so it's got my heart. I love it. It's see-through, so you know you're not dealing with any like cloudy, sugary stuff from California. But it's just the good stuff. I'm getting tart cranberry, tart cherry, but not overpowering jammy or fruity, and then with some mineralities to it that I just think are super fun. So I'm excited to enjoy this glass. Ben, what are you drinking today?
I've got a pretty sentimentally special bottle. I'm drinking a 2000 Chateau La Louvier. This is an Andre Lurton wine before he passed away in 2019. This has got 26 years on it. This is a Left Bank Bordeaux, and it is drinking still delightful. You can see the color is hard to see in here, but the color has got a little bit of tawny to it. That rim is starting to clear a little bit, but it's still quite dark. You can see for a 26-year-old wine, that's still got a lot of life in it. On my nose, I'm still getting graphite. I'm still getting some really nice wet earth. There's some like dried currant. You can see those tertiary flavors are starting to pick up as the age gets a little bit older. So we've moved from like fresh fruit to dried fruit. A little bit of sage and menthol notes coming through with a little bit of Cab Franc that's in there. Even more blood and iron, sanguine notes on the palate, and a really nice orange zest that I get from some aged Bordeaux. It's really fun to have that kind of citrus component kind of come through as a winey kind of bitterness. Tannins are still medium-bodied, right on the front and sides of my tongue. It's drinking really, really well. I mean, I don't know that I want to hold on to it too much longer. This was actually a gift. I just transitioned from one wine shop to a different shop to be a beverage director somewhere, and this was a gift from one of my reps, a goodbye gift, so I was thrilled to have it. Thought it was a good time to open it up.
Yeah. That might be the oldest bottle, Ben, that someone's ever drank on the podcast.
I wanted to do something wine special, at least. Either that or I was going to go the other way and bring out Winking Owl or something like that. But
I have had Charles Shaw on here before, so I've tried to. It wasn't 2 Buck Chuck. It was the reserve line because we've got standards. But I try to hit the spectrum for people, so it's not all high end stuff. It's stuff that people can find, and
Well, we have 2 rules at the wine shop that I was at and at the place I'm at now. And rule number 1 is there's always more room at the table, and rule number 2 is we don't ever yuck anybody else's yum. So wherever you're at, let's find the best version of that, and then we'll get you going on your journey. And that's usually how we kind of suck in our new wine people. So.
Yeah, sometimes you need a gateway. You need that gateway bottle to get you on your journey to something else.
That's right.
Okay. Ben, one of the questions I love to ask people so that our listeners can get a little bit of your story, a little bit of background on who you are and who we're going to get to meet today. If I were to look at your journey in faith, especially how it's changed, how it is evolving, what would you say like the last 10 years have looked like for you? How has your faith changed in that time?
So since 2016, so I'm a little bit older than I might even look. I don't know, maybe I look old. I'm almost 50. And so I actually went through most of my deconstruction by the time I got to 2016. I was in seminary. Let's see, a graduate. So I was in seminary from 2002 to 2004 at Asbury Theological Seminary. And while I was there, it was already things were already starting to shift. And then by the time I got to 2016, I was finishing up my last church planting gig. I have always worked bivocational. I've never been paid by a church. I kind of watched that as I was a pastor's kid. I kind of watched what that did to my family, and I never wanted my income tied to my faith journey.
It does complicate things.
It does complicate things. And I have a lot of sympathy for guys. I mean, I still work with a lot of guys that are going through it and still employed by churches. And it's nice to have somebody who's been on that side and see how the sausage is made, but they can be honest and have those hard conversations sometimes and question things. But so for the last 12 years, I've been working in retail. Before that, I was in restaurants, all with beverages, and trying to, over the last 5 or 6 years, really reanimate the table in a spiritual way. And so we'll get into this more later probably, but this idea of the feral spirit, the one that's not colonized, right? The one that's wild, that captures us, that we can't control. And so that happens at tables in people's homes. It happens in Scotch clubs and wine clubs. It happens, spontaneously. But it does have some patterns on the kinds of places that it usually happens. And so we've been trying to articulate that and to move that forward, move that kind of those expressions forward in, doing a very public spirituality. So I'm on to I don't even know if reconstruction is the right word, but I'm on to what does it look like to follow Jesus through the space now? And I've heard other people say on the podcast, but I didn't have, even as a pastor's kid, I grew up in the Wesleyan church. I was just reflecting with my brother today that we didn't have, I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and in the 90s. And so Flint, Michigan in the 90s was still a union town. So there was always this tension in an evangelical church in a union town that politics never got really involved, right? Because you had the kind of the pro-life movement starting and really in full swing. Most of the people at the church were Democrats. Most of them were union members, right? And so we were actually kind of blessed with not having a lot of politicization while I was growing up in a pretty evangelical environment. There was a little bit more of a don't ask, don't tell. It's not, this more of that Midwest polite. And I think that really helped keep us from some trauma that would have happened otherwise. And so I came to deconstruction intellectually. Like I don't think you go through being a pastor's kid without some trauma, but it all felt little T to me. It didn't, I didn't have some of the stories other people had. I just looked around and I didn't see, it didn't look like Jesus to me at all. And this was back in, like I said, this was back when George W. Bush was president, right? Like this was a long time ago. And so the critique kept getting stronger and stronger, and people's willingness to engage with that critique kept getting less and less. And eventually it was like, I feel like I'm doing more harm than good. And so I just stepped out and, we tried a couple of Episcopal kind of like high church things that I could be a part of, but my family was young and they thought it was weird and they didn't understand it. And so we just kind of said, all right, maybe we need a break. And we're still in that space. And, but yet we still are having conversations with people like you and trying to figure out what does it following Jesus look like when American Christianity maybe is a little more subverted than we wish it was.
I think you're a great example for a lot of people that you can deconstruct what you were given without having to walk away from all of it. And a lot of people think, oh, well, if I challenge this or I question this or I am honest intellectually about some of my doubts here, then that means I have to just give the whole thing up. And one of the things I love is just giving example after example of real life people who are offering something different. Like, no, that's not what you're doing. That's not what you've done. And yet you were willing to go into those, danger zones of, okay, I'm going to ask the question. I'm going to see where this goes. I'm going to acknowledge what doesn't feel right. In that deconstruction, you've shifted from what we might consider more of the traditional church spaces. And a lot of what you do these days is focused more around the table. And I know that's an image that really resonates with you. Tell us a little bit more. Why do you find such a good avenue for faith and for community in the table, maybe than, differently than you had in some of your church spaces growing up?
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge too that we still had good examples of the table even growing up, right? I've mentioned before, I loved church potlucks and carry-ins, or hot dish pass kinds of things. I thought that was something that was really of God, and you felt it when you were in it, right? It felt like the realist version of church to me always. My wife actually came out of the Church of the Brethren in Ohio, and they have the agape feast, right? Which is they saw how we did communion, and they're like, "What are you guys doing? This is nothing."
Lame.
Yes. And so we both came out of really big table traditions already, but they came with all of these trappings and kind of restrictions. And so when I was in graduate school, I started working in restaurants, and I just really enjoyed the freedom that space gave me to be really real with folks, and for folks to be real with me, and it to feel like a normal kind of interaction. And I did that until my kids got older, and restaurant game's hard for young families, and so I transitioned to retail. And then I said, but I wanted it to always still be about their table, right? And redeeming that table, and not to say that it was bad, but to say that we could make it even better, and that especially beer and wine and spirits really do elevate those experiences if we're mindful to see it and to and to participate in it. We'll often say that it's not the spirit that comes, it goes, it's our eyesight. And so a big part of what I'm trying to do is open people's eyes to the spirit encounters that are already happening in their everyday lives, that they don't need to manufacture. They don't need to try to, there's no magic words, right? There's just a participatory openness and a willingness and to step into an unafraid space, and then decide to abide in that space completely and be fully present. My definition of love is unafraid presence oriented toward care. And that's the kind of God I can serve, right? One that acknowledges that fear is real, life is suffering, the universe is trying to kill us. All of that stuff makes sense. And it's reasonable to be afraid. And yet we have these experiences in our lives, these mystical experiences where we're at peace, where there's joy, where we feel grace present. And I've said all the time, that's why I'm still a Christian, right? It's not from any argument. It's not even from any relationships. It's about these mystical experiences that you have a few times in your life that are way truer than anything that I've ever read, right? My favorite spiritual guide through all of this is Robert Farrar Capon. He wrote a fantastic book called The Supper of the Lamb. He's an Episcopal priest and cook and theologian in upstate New York. And the book famously spends one chapter on an onion.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And then right after that, he immediately goes into dicing an onion with no extra, and it's just like one of those moments where you're just aware of the beauty and spiritualness and the potential of a special moment in something as simple as an onion. And so we just started trying to invite people to open their eyes in those moments all the time. And alcohol really does help with that. It's a level of disarming that is particularly helpful, particularly at a dinner pace. And it has levels of nuance. I think it's fun that we call it spirit, right? I think there's something to that, that it gives you a little more imagination and a little bit more, it gives you more than what you would get from a Diet Coke,
It certainly does. So let's expand on that. That's obviously a huge theme of this podcast and a lot of the events and things that we do with Communion Wine Co. is using, wine in particular for us as a tool. And this stemmed for me, I would notice on a Saturday, we would meet a couple at a winery, and my wife and I would spend the afternoon at a tasting with them, have phenomenal conversation. I would see them at church the next day, and it felt much less than the experience we had at the winery. And so I just remember thinking, like, this glass has some power to really, allow us to have this engagement, and this interaction is better because of that. Now, obviously, it can get abused, as can most things, but what we're trying to foster is how to do it well and how to have a healthy understanding of this as a tool, as a resource. So why beer and wine in particular for you? You have obviously mentioned spirits, but why are these such a good avenue? What do you love about them that allows that deeper connection?
I think that both of them, just the first of it's always the slowing down piece, right? Partly because of the psychological part of it, right? We've invested in this now. This isn't table water. And so there's a part of you that feels like, oh, if I'm gonna pay some money for this, even if it's $4 for a beer, you want to savor, you want to figure out why you just paid $4 for this thing or whatever it is. And then the second thing is just you can't drink it fast. Like, I mean, you can, but it's not a good idea. Not even just from an alcohol perspective. Just it's not fun. The fun part is seeing it evolve over time, right? Even if it gets to the point where it evolves past where you like it, like that's part of this journey. And I tell people that when we're teaching, like, there's these two truths that I'm trying to get at the same time. One of them is that whatever you are tasting, your palate is absolutely right. And I need you to trust that 100%, right? You don't have to have the right words for it. There are no shoulds in tasting. Whatever you're getting is what you're getting. I want you to say those things, right? And at the same time, when you walk away from this table, I kind of need you to forget everything that you just learned. And the reason is because the amount of variables going into our experience we're having right now are almost impossible to replicate. And it happens because of me, and it happens because of the wine, and it happens because of everything else that's going on. The temperature of the wine, it's a different bottle. It might be a different year. It's been open longer or less open. I had Korean barbecue for lunch. I, had it's overcast out. The other person was wearing a New York Yankees hat. I didn't know what to do with that information. Like, all of these things kind of influence the experience you're actually having. And so we try not to put a lot of weight. We try not to put a lot of valuative weight into those buckets, but we try to put a ton of descriptive permission into those experiences, right? And so all of that leads to just a level of thoughtfulness that what ends up happening is you've had 10 minutes pass and you realize you weren't afraid in those 10 minutes, right? That you were at peace. And that's something that the table is not the only thing that brings, but it's one of the big things that it brings, right? Is when it's in these environments where they're safe, you're safe people, and there's something to direct your attention to that makes you be present, which is the only place you can experience peace, right? Is in the present. You actually are not afraid for a second. And that's the great gift of alcohol, I think.
Yeah, Gisela Kreuglinger has a phrase she calls holy tipsiness.
Yes.
And I love that image of just the right amount of, okay, I'm not as guarded or cautious, not obviously inebriated, but not quite as protective as I normally am. And then when you pair that with the table and you pair that with community, and that's where I love all the stories that emerge from this podcast of people sharing really great memories with wine, and you get to hear what it was about that moment, and it's something you remember, and I love that. I'm curious on this because you're reminding me when I did my WSET training, which is one of the for our listeners out there who don't know what that is. That's basically certification that is for wine or beer or spirits, but it's the more formalized training of what how to break it down, how to do all that. One of the things that was interesting to me when I was doing those different levels is that they would often say there are certain things you should be getting out of this wine, but then they would make room to say you can get other things too, but we need you to at least get these things. And I always thought that was such an interesting, I learned, like, as a little, little cheater technique. If it was a white wine, always guess lemon, right? Because odds are it's probably one of them, right?
Right.
And so
Yes.
you didn't get penalized for saying too many, but you did get penalized if you missed one of the ones that was, on it. So let's talk a little bit about wine is scary for people. And I think it's that mix of it's intriguing because they know there's more there than they understand. And so there's an intrigue to that. But then the flip side of that coin is it seems scary because I don't know how to talk about it or what I'm supposed to do. And so then people lean out. How do we lean into both of those and help me make sense of there's certain things you're supposed to get and everything else?
Yeah,
is fine.
I don't, typicity is one of those things that even if, it's one thing for a wine pro to be able to articulate that, and so when you're doing WSET training, it's just making sure that you can describe what you're getting as far as typicity is concerned. I don't worry quite so much about that with people who are just enjoying it, because I want to get that should language out of them pretty quickly, right? And so it's not that you can't, but the two things: one, we're never going to dumb it down, and what I mean by that is this is the most complicated culinary field in the world. It just is. Italy alone has over 400 indigenous varietals that we drink from, right? Like there's just no getting around that. It's in multiple languages. It's 8,000 years old. There's just too much to think that this isn't that complicated. But your experience at drinking it doesn't have to be. What I usually start with is let's just talk about, let's say it's a red wine. Is it red fruit or is it black fruit? Right? All right, it's red fruit. Is it more like cherries or is it more like strawberries? Right? All right, what do you taste that isn't fruit? And you just kind of start, and then I think some people are really good, deductive thinkers that way. Other people are way more inductive thinkers, where the first thing they taste is like, this tastes like my grandmother's perfume when I was 9, which is awesome. And then what we do is, okay, what probably was about that, right? Oh, there was white flowers. Oh, there was an alcohol kind of phenolic bitterness to it. Oh, there was orange. Like in either way it works. And you've got to be flexible enough as a professional, I think, to meet somebody where what their style of understanding taste is, and just go from there. The other thing that we teach a lot is that your brain can't do evaluative thinking and descriptive thinking at the same time. So when we taste together, we're really clear to say, I don't care whether you like it or not right now, right? When we do our Saturday tastings, we do 6 wines, and there'll be at various price points and styles or whatever. And there's inevitably someone's doing rack and stack as we're going. Oh, I like this one more than I like that one. And what happens is the moment that occurs, they'll get to the end and they'll know exactly which one they liked the most, and they'll be right. And then I'll ask them why, and they'll have no idea, right? Because your brain shuts off that descriptive thinking and it's just deciding, is this better than the one before it or not? So we say, all right, let's suspend evaluative thinking and just work on describing. Then we'll do all our evaluations at the end, and we'll figure out what you like, and then maybe you'll learn something about why you liked it. And so if they come away with that one takeaway, oh, I learned that I struggle with a wine that has this, tobacco cigar kind of earthiness to it. Today, that was not something that was appealing to me. You might notice a trend then, the next 3 or 4 times that comes up. Oh, I had a Brunello and I didn't really like that and that either. Oh, I had a Shiraz and I didn't really like that part of that either. And now you can start to develop some tasting trends that you see in yourself. And then you almost flip it on their head and go, all right, now I'm going to find a version of this that I do like, right? Particularly when somebody else is paying or when you're doing the tastings, right? But you're actually hunting for that, right? Because now you're trying to disprove your bias, right? And that's when you go from a casual wine drinker to someone who's obsessed like us, right? My white whale for that forever was Pinotage, which is one of the only grapes native to South Africa, and it's a hybrid that they made there between Cinsault and Pinot Noir, and I find it to be one of the most atrocious drinking experiences in wine. It always, to me, smells like a tire fire. It's got this burnt rubber phenolic notes that I just cannot get behind. And I was like, I'm bound and determined to find one that I like. And I had a winemaker in, and his wife happened to be a chemist, and she isolated the compound in Pinotage that gave that tire fire note. And they started breeding it out of their vines. And it wasn't that expensive a bottle. It's $25 Pinotage. I was like, oh, I can drink this. oh, I found my bottle. Okay, I still like all wine. I can still say that I like all wine because I found a Pinotage I can drink. But that's when you get on our side of the table where it's like, all right, now I'm obsessed. But those are some of the ways that we've done it where we've helped to grow wine drinkers at the stores anyway.
So I think like I've done some industry tastings where, you, depending on the day, you're like 12, 15 different, tastings that you're doing. And most of the time you're spitting just because these are, you're trying to get through a volume of these. And it's funny when you do it the same people regularly, you start to like notice quirky things that, oh, this guy likes that. I like this, whatever.
Yeah.
And so like for me, that fresh asphalt flavor is not my jam. Like,
okay,
don't like it. But I have a friend who I regularly taste with who loves it. And so like if I take a sip before he does, I'll be like, oh, you're going to love this one. Because it doesn't matter what it is, because I'm picking up that flavor, right? And I know he'll like it. And then we always joke, he'd be like, yes, this is a good one. And I'm always like, ugh, it's not for me. So here's my question for you. What's the weirdest wine flavor that you like?
Oh my gosh.
That if someone were to regularly taste with you and then they picked it out, they'd be like, oh, Ben's going to love this one.
I'm going to borrow my wife's language for this flavor that I also love. Okay. My wife, as I said, is from Western Ohio, total farm girl, farm country. And she loves big, earthy, dirty, not necessarily dirty as far as fermentation, not necessarily natural wines, but big, earthy wines like big Northern Rhone Syrahs, things like that, big Grenaches. And she'll put her nose all the way in a glass and just bury it in there. And she'll go, sweet poo. And that is her, like, and that, and it led me to actually articulate what that was. That, like, when you grew up near farms, you knew the difference between live earth and dead earth, right? Like, you knew when there was a ripe soil that was ready planting, and that was a certain kind of manure and stink and earth. And then you knew when you would smell the roadkill, right? Which is a different kind of death and a different kind of that, right? And that became kind of this note of like an affinity for what reminded me of in the vineyard, right? When it was done, especially in darker, riper wines, I always have and other people are like, I don't know how you get past that, man. It just smells like barnyard to me. So that's one of them. I would say a lot of the flavors that come out of orange wines, amber wines, skin contact whites are also in that world where you're just like, it's in the kindest way to say it is marmalade, right? When you get that really bitter orange peel, grapefruit peel marmalade note, I think a lot of people that's a turnoff for. I absolutely love it, especially with food. I think it's one of the great food wines of the world. So those are two that I think I get a lot of eye rolls from other people about.
So Ben's a fan of the sweet poo. That's what we're getting here.
The sweet poo. I'm a really fan of my wife, who is also a fan of the sweet poo.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Before we go on, I have to tell you a story about spitting.
Okay.
Because it also involves my wife, and it's fantastic. So, like we'll go on these industry trips on occasion, and I was visiting them. So Michigan happens to be has quite a nice wine scene. We're like the 5th largest wine producing state as far as fine wine is concerned. And especially aromatic whites like Rieslings and Pinot Gris grow really well up in the Leelanau Peninsula in the Traverse City area. And so I was on a 4-day trip, and I was seeing 19 wineries in 4 days. And my wife went with me. And at this point, this is like 2019. My wife is picking on me ruthlessly. She's a labor delivery nurse, so she does like real work. And just ruthlessly picking on me about how my job's not a real job. And she was going to prove it to me on this trip by drinking with me the whole time. And I was like, okay. So the first day we only had 4 wineries. And it was fine. The second day we have 6 wineries. In the 5th winery, we're down in the cellars, and the guy's just like barrel thieving things and like pulling, so many wines. And we're just walking along the cellar. So we don't have a bucket, and we're just spitting into the drain. And my wife hates spitting in the best of circumstances. And she especially does not like spitting fine wine. And these are some of the best wines we're going to taste. And so she just refuses to spit. I keep warning her. I was like, honey, you're going to regret this. This is going to be a problem. You're going to regret this. No, it's fine. And so we get to the next place, the last place we're stopping. I'm talking to the owner, and over his shoulder, I can see my wife just kind of wobbling back and forth and back and forth. I said, "Hey, do you need to get some fresh air?" And she went off and she got into the car, and then I had to park her under a tree and let her sleep it off while I went in to eat with my parents and my kids at her favorite restaurant. And that next day she spit everything. And then the last day she said, I haven't spent a lot of time with the kids. I really feel like they probably need to spend some time with me on this, and totally bailed out on my last day of tasting. So it was a little harder than she gave it credit for.
It is interesting because I feel the same way. When I'm with a winemaker, it feels like the most insulting thing in the world to spit because, I'm like, you have poured yourself into this craft. You are now sharing it with me, and to spit this out in front of you, feels like a literal slap in the face. So if I'm with a winemaker, now again, if you're doing 6 in a day, you're host, but I will do everything I can not to spit in that situation. So thankfully, most of my industry tastings, it's a lineup of bottles. The winemakers aren't there. No, but that is truly fun. And the most I've ever done in a day was 4 tastings or 4 wineries. And by the 4th, it's like you're just giggly and you're like,
the joke is always, this tastes like red wine.
Yeah.
This tastes like red wine.
Yeah.
Sir, that was a Chardonnay. This tastes like red wine.
It's all red wine. Yeah, even when we would do some of like our wine trips, and we would do 3 wineries in a day, and I realized that's too much. People can't do that, so now we usually cap it at 2.
Pros can do it, especially if you're spitting. Pros can do it, but folks that just or folks that just know, it's hard. It's hard because it is delicious, and it's hard to have that kind of discipline to be like, all right, we're gonna settle this down a little bit.
Truly, when it's like some of the best wine you've ever had, everything in your body is like, do not spit this out, because like this is delicious, and then your brain is telling you this is gonna be bad.
We were in Santa Barbara and Paso Robles this last May, and for my wife's 50th birthday and some other stuff, and went to like several days of wine tasting. And we were at Epoch Winery, which is like one of these great high-end Paso places. Like, it's all on the west side, so it's all limestone soils, big GSM blends. Everything's 14.5, 15%, but so polished and refined. And I just looked at my friends and I was like, we're going in on this one. We'll stay here as long as we got to stay, because I'm not spending anything here.
The only other time I can think of like that is they have these like vendor events that will come into like Phoenix, and it's all these different wineries from all around the country, and they're trying to get local shops and restaurants and everything to buy. And I've been to a few of those where the entire room, it's just aisle after aisle after aisle of all of these wines, and you can drink whatever you want, Yeah. And that's the other day where it's like, I'm not driving. I'm just going to get someone to drive me, and I'm going to have a good time and enjoy a lot of these wines.
I will say that even in those times, like I'm at the spot where I'm probably good at 45 or 50 tastes, but then it's just your palate's so fatigued you can't taste anything at all, and I'll finish with some sparkling just to kind of clean it up a little, but it's very, very hard to really.
Well, the joke with my friend and I becomes at that moment where you get to one where you're drinking it and you're like, yeah, I would drink this, and then you like check what it is, and it's like $150 wholesale. You're like, what is wrong with me? Of course I would drink this. But you're like, yeah, this is not bad. I think I could handle this. And you're like, oh, my palate's shot. So yeah,
I think too, just to kind of bring it back to like how we invite people into these spaces. When leaders or hosts, let's say, I like that, probably in this world, I like that language a little bit more, but when hosts show that level of vulnerability, again, with some, like with some boundaries, of course, but when they show that level of vulnerability and just allow themselves to get to that spot, it really disarms everyone. I'm at a new spot now, and one of the first rules was I needed to make the most daring decisions I could, so I knew some of them would fail, so that when it came time for us to talk about programming, everybody felt like their ideas were valid, right? And so that if Ben was willing to throw something out there that probably had a 20% chance of succeeding, and he ended up looking silly because of it, or it didn't go like he wanted, then my idea is probably not that dumb, right? And it just creates this little bit of disarming place for people to kind of well, what if we do this? So, one of my guys is a pipe guy, so we're doing a pipe and pastry stout pairing in June. Because why not, right? Anytime we can mix it up and do something different, it's a lot of fun. So, yeah.
It does bring out a whole different idea of what it means to be a host.
Yeah.
What it means to create space for
We
people
have,
to have
we
the
have
experience.
really bastardized, I think, what hospitality is, right? We've decided that somehow in performing for people as host, that somehow makes them feel welcome, and it's really the exact opposite. It makes them intimidated and makes you look good, and anybody who's paying attention can kind of see through the insecurity that you're showing. And in reality, it's really your disposition towards them. You're willing to yes and, you're willing to not be in control of the conversation. It's way more about leaning in and learning and listening and evolving with them, not executing your plan, whatever you thought that was. I think that's become a big part of, I like being we might talk about beer camp a little bit. I love being the beer guy or the alcohol guy in theology circles, but I think I like even more being the theology guy in alcohol circles. Because both people need that profit, right? Like I know you talk about being right on the inside of the the edge, right? And I'm just on the other side on both sides, it feels like, right? I'm just on the other side, speaking into the spaces. And I really like that place, because it insists on some vulnerability, right? Both of those places are hard to, particularly being the theology guy in a wine circle, right? If you're going to introduce those ideas, that it takes a lot of vulnerability, and yet I found that people want to go there, and they're not afraid to go there as long as it doesn't feel boundaried by gotcha language or things that could be potentially triggering. And so developing theology and that is feral, that isn't colonized and that still talks about spiritual things. I want to talk about ritual at some point and just kind of how important these rituals are and why I think they're important. But that's, like that to me is the really fun space to be in wine circles. It's not a lot of times where you can look a winemaker in the face and go, do you know that this stuff is even more important than you think it is? And you have actually something to say to that is true, that will be life-giving to them. Like that's such a cool message to be able to deliver to people who are doing this craft. And it's so easy to get caught up in, my production numbers and, what's my retail presence? How many wine lists am I on? Like, did I get scores? Whatever, like when you can actually invite something metaphysical into their work, they're ready for it. They really are.
Okay, so let's trace back to a few things you've mentioned. The feral spirit. Let's hear you unpack that. What are your ideas there?
So I borrowed the term from Robert Capon, talking about the difference between feral and festal cooking, right? And so he's this book that we were talking about earlier is a book. It's one recipe, and it's leg of lamb for 8 people 4 times. And he just keeps breaking down the lamb over and over and over again, making new things out of the same thing in this feral style cooking. And I really liked that image of spirituality once I left the church. I had this story from that trip in Santa Barbara that I tell, that we were on a boat going out to this Channel Islands, the North Channel Islands, to do a little nature scene. And while we're going out there, we are surrounded by a megapod of 1,000 common dolphins. Even the marine biologists were like, I've seen this like twice in life, right? And so imagine 1,000 dolphins surfing this boat, right? We didn't come to them, they came to us, right? And I'm just watching these dolphins at the front of the boat, just as far as I can see, jumping and flipping and doing all this chatter. And I'm reminded of a conversation with another marine biologist who said, we don't have an evolutionary reason for why dolphins do that. They just seem to do it for the sake of play. And I had this mystical moment, Jeremy, like in that moment where I was like, this is a dolphin engaging in spirit at a level a dolphin can. This is a dolphin saying, everything in this ocean is trying to kill me. And watch this backflip.
And check this out.
right? And that's what the feral spirit is. It's these mystical moments. And so my most compassionate reading of the church is that we have people who've had these moments and then tried to create rituals to remember them because it's so easy to become afraid. So there's a reason why things like baptism and communion became some of our rituals, I think, right? It's these moments that we weren't afraid, that we wanted to keep remembering, right? And so those rituals are really important. And yet, instead of us remembering, we colonized it. We slowly made God in our own image, right? And it became part of our fear dialogue, part of that, that power dynamic and fear. All of a sudden, it became about, are we doing it right? Right. The moment that the spirit didn't show up like we thought it did, we tried to manipulate the spirit. We tried to manipulate the situation. And then, there's a group of people that are saying, well, you all must not be spiritual enough, right? And then there's another group of people like my dad who would have said the opposite. They would have said, I'm not doing it enough. I'm not doing it right. The spirit's not showing up because I'm not holy enough, right? And that, of course, flowed down to our family as well in some hard ways. But like that was the earnestness of a leader, right? It wasn't like hypocrisy. It was the opposite. But he was trapped in this system where he thought he had to manufacture something to make it happen, right? All he had to do was to trust that if he opened his eyes enough times, that the spirit would be there again. But you don't get to control the spirit.
Yeah.
And I think the sneaky thing that nobody talks about in churches, especially with ones that have more Pentecostal traditions, is we kind of know that we're manipulating it. We kind of know that we're making it happen. And so there's a cheapening to it that happens, even in our hearts. And then it gets less and less satisfying. And we get more and more desperate. And we make bigger and bigger fearful decisions until soon we're, in bed with Rome. And and there's all of these other things that are happening that we're compromising because we've lost what we had. As opposed to you and I sitting at a table, drinking a glass of wine together, right? Or eating a beautiful, plate of whatever, pasta, whatever. Or getting on the floor and playing with your kids. Or listening or playing music. Or sharing stories with each other. Or Brueggemann's idea of neighborliness, right? These concrete acts of justice, right? And care. Or contemplative acts, contemplative practices, right? Where we sit in silence and aren't afraid of that silence, right? These are those everyday rituals that invite more spiritual encounters, but more precisely remind us of the times where we did feel those things, right? And so it doesn't have to feel like every time you and I get together that the spirit's going to show up and it's going to be this mystical kind of moment, because we also have the memory of all the times that it did. And that gives us this opportunity to just remember together. And when we remember together, then it reinforces both things, because you remember something a little differently than I did, and all of a sudden I'm sharing your memories too. And when you do that as a community, now you're singing songs, right? Now you're telling stories. Now you're saying, oh, you remember when Jesus did this? Oh, you remember when Jesus did that? And that's when things actually get interesting, because now we're creating experiences where all of our eyes are open at the same time to the potential of the spirit being there, right? But it didn't happen because we tried to make it happen. It happened because we remember that it did, and that it can again, right? So that's what I'm trying to do now in people's homes and in clubs and in public spaces, any place that we can gather and be serious about spiritual ideas without it having to have a brand put on it.
I love that. You're reminding me, Walter Brueggemann talks about the freedom of God versus the accessibility of God. And how, is God free to show up when God wants and not show up? Or is God accessible to us and we have figured out how to make God accessible? And, in different eras of, the church, or like he talks, through the Old Testament, when Solomon's king, now Solomon has access to God at all times and the king controls access, right? Well, then you lose the freedom of God. And, so there's always this tension of, do we control God? Can we make God appear when we want? Or is God free to do what God wants? And I think the way you're describing it is a beautiful way to navigate that, where we remember how God has shown up. We remember that God has been accessible, right? But we also make space for the freedom of God to say, we're not going to force it. We don't control God. And so we keep showing up in hopes that God will show up. And when God doesn't, we remember the way God has, and we let that, carry us over to the next time. I actually think that's a beautiful way of thinking about
When
these
we do
ideas.
it together, I can borrow your courage sometimes, right? Like if I'm doubting, if I'm scared that maybe this is all made up, maybe I didn't have that real experience, I start gaslighting myself. When we're together, I can borrow your courage for that moment, right? And then maybe next time you're borrowing mine, and both of those things become like the reason why I'm committed to staying and doing this in community, right? There's only two things I miss about church, really, and it's singing in public together and potlucks, right? And that's it. That's all I miss. I miss the table and I miss singing together. And I think that's the stuff right there, right? That's where all the best stories are told. Sorry for preachers there, but you have the third best stories in church.
Okay, let's talk theology beer camp, because this is something you and I are both a part of. This, I guess this year will be your second year.
This is my second year as the beer coordinator. Yep.
Of being the beer coordinator, which may not sound like a big deal, dear listener, unless you've been there. And then let me tell you, this is a big deal. It is I've talked about it before on the podcast. It's a theology conference that serves beer, and you can have as much beer as you like while you're there. And I believe it starts at 10 a.m. in the morning or something is when the first pours start. Maybe now that I know Ben, I'll get a little earlier pour. I'll just, go up to my friend. But so this year, not only is it going to be your second year, but Cabernet and Pray has officially become a God pod, which is just another way of saying we're one of the official podcasts, associated with Theology Beer Camp. It's unlike anything else I've ever been to. I went last year. I'm going to go again this year. It's a wild time of talking about some beautiful theology, making room for a bunch of varied perspectives, not only ideologically, but in practice, and everyone being okay with that. It is literally drinking beer in a church sanctuary with pews that felt very strange to me to bring my big old Stein with me, but the whole thing was awesome. Tell us how you got connected to this. What has that experience been like for you to have an expression of church in this way?
Yeah, and it was crazy. I got connected with Trip through PDENS. So Bible for Normal People was probably I've gotten into the podcast world a lot more in the last couple of years, but it really wasn't a thing that I was into too much. And so when I was really working on hermeneutic issues and kind of like how do we understand scripture, I worked a lot through some of Pete's books, and then Pete and Jared's podcast, I think, really helped me a lot. And then they talked about it. So I started listening to Trip. Everything he does is way over my head. I'm not I have a seminary degree, but I'm not a theologian by any stretch. That's not my world. That's not my first world. And so, but I just cold called him. I just emailed him. I was like, hey, Trip, do you need beer help? This is what I do. This is what I've done. I've done these kinds of things before. And he's like, actually, we desperately need beer help. And so we were in St. Paul, Minnesota last year. I went up there on vacation. We went to and met with a ton of breweries. We ended up having 25 different breweries represented at the camp, and over 50 unique beers on 6 taps plus cans. And it was an absolute blast. And then right after that, about 2 weeks later, Trip called me up and said, hey, you want to do it again next year? We're going to Kansas City. And I was like, I'm in. Let's do this. And so we just got back from a site visit about 4 weeks ago to Kansas City. Got to talk to some great breweries there. Super, super excited about this upcoming time. It's October 8th through 10. And I know there's still tickets available, at least of right now. I don't know where we'll be at by the time this airs. But I would highly encourage folks, if you can get in and around Kansas City. It is it's unlike anything, man. It is one of the great. I don't know that anybody comes with an open heart and leaves without at least one mystical kind of experience. Like, I just don't think you can walk away from it not feeling like you've been changed. That was my experience anyway.
So there's one afternoon where I can't remember what they called it, but do you remember where we went out onto outside and everybody was hanging out.
Oh
They
yeah,
kinda,
yeah.
what was the term they called that?
It's not Oktoberfest. Oh
Yes,
shoot.
yeah, you're on the right
Yeah,
track.
it was their version of Zestoberfest or something. Oktoberzest. That was it. Oktoberzest.
Oktoberzest, yeah. And so they had
Yes.
everybody move outside for the afternoon, and they had all the beers out there, food out there. People could smoke, and it just whole thing. Well, the church is like this, historic traditional church in the middle of this neighborhood, and so right across the street are all these houses. And I remember watching people drive by, and I'm thinking, they have got to be thinking, there goes the neighborhood. Like, what has happened to this church? Everybody's out there smoking and drinking, and like, what is going on? But that's what I love about it is I think it's like a shot in the arm of imagination of like, let's just imagine, like, let's open the doors of like, God, we're not going to say what you can and can't do, how you can and can't show up. Like, we're just going to be open. And it is that, the freedom and the accessibility of God we were talking about earlier, just like, we're going to show up. We're going to see what happens. And I loved it. And I'm excited to go again.
So it reminds me of my first drag event that I ever went to.
Okay.
And
well,
I was
this is a hard pivot, but let's go. I'm here for it.
No, it's not at all. You'll totally understand. I was at my first Pride drag event. This is a couple years ago, in Grand Haven, Michigan, of all places, which is not a place you would normally associate with a great drag event. But they had a really cool drag show and concert, the whole bit. And I was sitting on there thinking about, why is drag so important? And I said, I think it's important because this is a group of people going to the edges of their imagination, of what gender means, of what sexuality means, of what performance means, of what art means, all the way to the edges, so you have permission to take 2 steps. And I think that's what beer camp is, right? Beer camp is intentionally absurd. We had a soft serve ice cream machine that we were making beer floats of with New Holland Dragon's Milk and Founders KBS, 2 of the best stouts in the world. And I'm making ice cream floats out of them for 2 hours while people smoke cigars. Like, we're going to the edges just so when you go home, you feel like, you know what? If that's okay, me starting a Scotch club in my church, me doing this with these people, me trying to just outing myself as a lover of whatever, it's possible, it's permissible, but it's real heroes and pioneers being on the edge of those things that I think makes that stuff possible.
That's beautiful. I like that.
If you've never gone to a drag event, I highly, highly recommend it. It will also change your life.
That might be a hot take for some of our listeners today.
It will make you uncomfortable in ways that will, if you're paying attention and you're asking questions, you'll wonder why you're so uncomfortable. Because it's super easy to be liberal and progressive in your nice, comfy, white, evangelical, middle class areas. When you actually end up on margins with folks that are already marginalized, and they're doing their best to celebrate it, and you're trying to be celebrating it in solidarity with them, that's when you learn where you're at and what you want to still work on.
Very cool. Okay, before we transition to our questions that we ask each person, you wrote a book of poetry, I think back in 2021. I would love if we could get you to read some of it for us. I think it'd be cool. Speaking of imaginations, let's hear a little bit of your imagination.
Yeah, Ordinary Poems, an Extraordinary Moment in Time. So since this is Cabernet and Pray, this is a more technical poem, but I'm going to read a poem that I wrote that is a traditional ode. So it's actually a structured kind of poem, and this one is to red wine.
Hear, hear.
750 millimeters. Purple liquid trapped in bottles colored, mostly water, alcohol, and ethers. Closer still, we see what's more uncovered. Floating microscopic parts of places, terroir, the dirt, the soil, worked by lovers. And flickering between those spaces, 1,095 hours of sun. And still further in, we find more traces of sweat from the lovers who have begun to press their skin to skins and stems to juice, to pump and pour or barrel and more tons, and hand to time as alchemies let loose. New life is given to these vines and roots. New life begins again in strangers' hands. Fresh wind, ruach, is breathed at cork's release. It draws us in once more to nature's dram. It's poured and swirled and passed to make the peace between dissonance and best intentions, and all this movement adds to the caprice. With words voiced over crystal suspension, the sound waves shake our red elixir. Something's born again in those vibrations. New life comes this time with just a whisper. In a moment, our glass is mixed with tears that season our first sips between new lovers. The gift keeps on its giving, easing fears of lovers over tables, over years. To our surprise, this new life comes again, pouring o'er our lips and tongues' taste buds. Flavors evolve the glass could not contain. Even more new life courses through our blood. Warms us, gives us courage to lean in more and risk enough to rise above fear's flood. To prove love's sacrifice was worth the pour of dirt and light and tears and sweat and time, to show what crazy lovers do this for. 13.5% could be the line, drawn through our generations, creeds, and race, that this eau de vie is so much more than wine. This thread connects lovers through time and space, so maybe we can pour with it a little grace.
That is freaking awesome. Yeah.
So that's to red wine.
That was great.
Yeah. Thanks,
if I
man.
wasn't already a fan of red wine, I would be. You won me over. That's great. I love that. What made you want to write poetry, or is that something you normally do?
A pandemic will do that to an extrovert.
Yeah.
I've written my whole life. I started writing seriously in 2019 before the pandemic. And then when it hit, it just slowed me down, man. And I just didn't have a choice. And I got into birding like a lot of people did, right? I got into the baking like a lot of people did. And I got into writing, and I started writing at 6:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, every morning for 2 hours. Whatever came that day. And for a while, it was like a poem a day. It was just a really, really special moment, a spirit, moment in time that I use that as one of my examples of like, art is one of those things that when you're in it, you can use that then to remember those times when you weren't afraid, right? When you're in those spaces where you're in flow states, or when you're just totally in the moment. My kids are all artists. My younger two are at art schools, graduate schools in art, or undergraduate schools and art schools. And they talk about these moments where when they get in the piece, right? And like hours will pass and they realize that they've just been totally removed from all of the fear that they had, even when they started the project. And so, yeah, it's just me trying to practice what I preach as an amateur, right? Like, I don't do this for a living. I don't do any of this for a living. Oh, I drink for a living, I guess. But other than that, I don't do anything else like this. So I try to perform and let people know that it's okay to perform it and to do it as an amateur, right? So I'm going to close you with one more poem, okay? And this is called Amateurs, and this is one of the spoken word pieces that I'll do like on mics and stuff when I get a chance. With wine, let's see how this goes. We're not there yet, but we're getting there.
All right, here we go.
This world needs more amateurs, painters, musicians, poets, dancers, wine drinkers, cake bakers, less freelancers, more for the love of the game players, less show me the money haters. We need songwriters on YouTube, home cooks who actually serve people food, streamers who fly, fish, and kayak, and gamers who play till the ball's flat. More duffers and hacks and 11-minute milers, ungifted lovers who are just ranking filers. We need more don't give a fuck what you think of me, less counting the likes on our Twitter feed. Life lovers, amateurs with no eye to gain, except for the joy that comes when they play. Unafraid that the whole world or no one might see the things in this life they'd all do for free.
That's nice. Well done, sir. Those are good.
Yeah, so I'm trying to do this as and stay in the Bible world, I'm not trying to, I admire you guys who can do this. I I just do a day job, and then I try to stay on the margins and stay close enough to people that are doing really crazy creative things, and that's amazing. But I think there's a place for people like me that aren't doing it professionally, that aren't getting paid to do it, that aren't getting paid to think or to write or to perform, right? And we just keep going about our days, but we still engage. And it's not just for you all to do it and for us to watch you do it, right?
Absolutely.
So that's what I'm trying to do out here in Midwest.
Cheers to
America.
you, Ben. I love it. We need more of it. So I hope your story inspires others. All right, let's talk about a few questions that I like to ask each of our guests, and we get to compare your answers. I'm excited for your first. Well, I'm excited for all these, but I don't normally get to talk to wine experts who give this answer. So,
yes,
share a story. What is your favorite experience? Can you even think of like one? This would be hard for you, I would imagine. But like, if I said, Ben, like the best glass of wine you've ever had in your life, how would you even quantify that? What would come to your mind? Is there a story maybe that kind of emerges toward the top, and why that story of all the other experiences you've had? Why does that one stand out to you?
So, second most important pairing in the world is what is on the table. The most important pairing in the world is who's across it. And so I had an opportunity to, my brother was living in Italy for a while and brought me back a very, very nice bottle of Barolo, which is my favorite grape in the world, Nebbiolo. And Barolo is my favorite place for that favorite grape in the world. And he happened to bring one back from 1999, which was the year I got married. And I had already been sitting on a bottle of Lallier champagne from 99, waiting for my 20th wedding anniversary. So when 2019 came around, I went to a friend's house, or a friend who was at a great Italian restaurant. I said, Chris, here's 2 bottles. You do whatever you want. I'll pay whatever you want. Make it special. And I gave him this bottle of Barolo and this bottle of champagne. And we sat in this quiet half of the restaurant that he blocked off for us. And my wife and I just sat and drank one of the most amazing bottles, 2 of the most amazing bottles of wine with a custom-made meal that was made just for those 2 bottles and just for us 2 people. And I don't know how you top that.
Seriously, jeez.
So it's still one of my pictures is me with my chin on the top of that bottle, just basking in the beauty of my wife in that moment. So yeah, that's for sure the most important bottles that I've drank in my life. I have one other really cool one because I don't drink, you don't get a lot of chances for, I said there's only 4 kinds of wine in the world here. There's weekday wine, there's weekend wine, there's special occasion wine, and there's once in a lifetime wine. Everything falls into one of those 4 categories. Sometimes you don't know when you're going to have your once in a lifetime wines. And I was doing a dinner where I was actually cooking a 5-course meal for a set of really important. I was working for another guy, and we were there's a very famous winery in Spain called Vega Sicilia at Ribera del Duero. Okay. It's probably the most famous winery in Spain. And their most famous bottle is called Unico. Okay. And when I was doing this back in probably 2017, their Unico went for $450 a bottle. And I think right now it's between 650 and 700. And I used to cook for a living, but I haven't had it in years. And I was tasked with cooking an actual Spanish meal for these actual customers with these incredible wines. And I had the courage to do cocheda, which is like a peasant stew. It's like a peasant pork stew. And I decided to do it with this $450 bottle. And I pulled it off. It went really well. And afterwards, we're cleaning up, and my boss looks over at me, and there's a half a bottle of Unico sitting there. And he says, "Go home and drink this with your wife." Wow. And so didn't expect, when you do these events, you're just so exhausted afterwards. I had nothing left to give. I'd been there all day. And I went home just sweat drenched. And Julie and I didn't even have nice wine glasses at the time. I poured them in, like $1 Libby cups, Libby glass cups. And she and I drank a $450 Tempranillo in absolute silence, unable to speak, just that the gift we'd been given, it was a beautiful, beautiful moment. So those are the 2 that come to mind all the time.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, those stories, those don't disappoint, Ben. Well done. All right. Which member of church history would you trust to pick a bottle of wine for you? And who would you not trust to pick out a bottle of wine for you, and why?
Okay, I'm going to do the second one first.
Okay.
And because I've already talked about the first one once, but I'm going to expand it because I'm going to take the license. So the person does not get to pick my wine is John Wesley, even though he's the, namesake of the church that I grew up in, and I love a lot of the stuff that they did. He is also the reason we have a temperance movement in the United States. And one of the
Seems
things
like a
that's made
solid
my life
reason to put him on the list. Yeah.
more difficult than anything else is I'm not letting him anywhere near my wine selection. The group is there's actually 4, and they're all modern. Okay. So I've talked about Robert Farrar Capone already. I think that he would be the perfect person
to
pick a bottle of wine, right?
Yeah, that's a good pick.
As long as you don't ask him to pick New York Riesling, he's gonna nail it. He's gonna nail it. The second person there, and this is the one that I want to tell me about the wine, is Frederick Buechner. I think his poetic observations on everyday life are some of the things that got me through some of the hardest parts of my life. So I want him there to talk about it with me. I want Eugene Peterson there because he taught me how to cherish the everyday, right? And how to find, I think the reason I am able to find big things and little things is because of Eugene Peterson in my life. And then the last one is Richard Rohr. And it's just because I want him there to ask questions and to be amazed. Because there's nothing better than watching Richard Rohr be fascinated. Because he's the most sincere. He's just so sincere. He would just be in awe of whatever everybody was saying and what the wine was doing. And I'm sure he'd have the best questions. And, he'd have some obscure tie that would make it, all of that. If I could just sit in the corner while that encounter was going on, I think that'd be pretty amazing.
Great answer. I like that. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
The Pinotage isn't any good.
No. Little call.
Just kidding. I mean, theologically, almost everything, right? But I would say the really, really important things are not believing in eternal damnation is a big one that I think scared me when I was a kid, and that I let go pretty quickly. The most pivotal one, Jeremy, I think this is a good one. I think this is actually something that's helpful. My relationship with the text, with the Bible, changed probably. And that's a little Pete Enzi kinds of influence here, but when I stopped thinking that the Bible was God talking to me, a lot of my problems with the Bible stopped being problems anymore. Right? The moment that I saw the text, when somebody asked me, who told you what your relationship to the text was supposed to be? Because the Bible can't say that, because that's self-referential.
Yeah.
So that has to come out of tradition. Right? So someone's passed that on, which means there's a potential for human error there. Right? And when I abandoned this idea of an ineffable, authoritarian, perfectly, preserved document that was supposed to speak into my life completely, and I moved to a position of, this is a group of people talking to another group of people about their experience of the divine. It just changed my relationship with the text. I didn't have to be defensive anymore. I didn't have to worry about inconsistencies anymore. I didn't have to explain it. I could accept it or I could let it go, but regardless, it would be I could learn from it. I actually learned more about the Bible as wisdom literature after I abandoned the idea that it was authoritative. So that was probably that's probably the biggest thing. I've been tons of other things. Luckily, I came out as affirming. I was affirming way before any of my kids came out. I have 3 queer kids. I was very, very fortunate to have done that work beforehand. So I have beautiful experiences of my kids coming out to me, at 16, 15, 14. And, I was very, it's just as a father, I think that probably was the thing that helped me the most, was going through that work first. But that's not how we started, right? We didn't start in that space. So those are some things.
That was great. Yeah, the Bible one is a domino. That'll knock a whole bunch of other ones over too.
That's a hermeneutic domino.
What do you see as the main issue facing Christianity in the U.S. today?
I know that everybody says Christian nationalism, right?
That's the most popular answer. Not wrong,
And
just it is the
and,
most
and
popular
it's not
answer.
wrong, but it's not the only thing. I think if we can't read ourselves as Rome or as Babylon in the story, we don't really have a chance. Like, as long as we still think we're the persecuted, as long as we still think we're Israel, as long as we still think we're, like, I think if Americans are reading scripture and don't see themselves as empire, you're always going to read it wrong. Like, I just don't know what the other answer is. Yeah. I think that's easily the thing that I wish I could get folks to, that American exceptionalism and the idea that somehow we have to always be the good guys. Clearly, I don't know of anybody on the outside who thinks that.
Yeah. Okay, what's something blowing your mind right now that you're learning?
I'm working on my idea of, and oh gosh, I hate that I don't know her name off the top of my head. Who wrote queering theology, maybe, or queering? I don't. Oh man, I read it several years ago, and it just kind of stuck with me for a long time. The book was fine, and I liked where it went, but I was thinking of it a whole different way. I'm working on querying my methodology. So, one of the deep desires of my life is that I learn to see the world through my kids' eyes, right? And just recently, I've started to think about what that looks like in a different theology, and particularly queering boundaries. I'm toying around with this concept, or this name of transtheism, right? Where I'm neither an atheist nor a theist, right? I think that I go one step past panentheism in that I don't know that I think God has agency, but I do think there's a divine spirit that we can choose to participate in. But and somebody kind of said, that sounds like a transtheist. I didn't know what that meant. And the more I got into that phrase, the more I liked that idea of disarming the binary that we've created between theism and atheism, as a way, as a questioning the power structure that puts people in camps when they're talking about something none of us have any other idea what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And so right now I'm really trying to figure out, what does it look like to talk to my queer brothers and sisters that I can learn from as a straight cisgender man, along with talking to people like my kids about their experience of the divine, that keeps me from putting things in tight boundaries. And that might be a queer methodology I can really learn from a long time, but I'm just getting started on that journey. It's just something that's happening just recently. So that's probably something that's blowing my mind right now.
Yeah.
Queering your methodology.
There you go. What's something you're excited about right now?
Besides beer camp? I think there's real conversations in the church right now about what it means to be at the end of an empire age. Like, I think there's some people that are really being honest about that. And I think that's the first step. And so I think that, when we start to think about what does it look like for the United States not to be a superpower, what does it look like for American Christianity to not be the most important expression of Christianity in the world, never mind spirituality, I think it's going to create a lot of good sifting. And I think it's a hard thing to ask for because it's all pain. But it's like me getting back into the gym, man. I think I don't think there's another way. And so I have to kind of be excited about it, mostly for my kids, and maybe if I have them grandkids, that maybe there's a church that's prophetic again, that's on the come up if things get dark enough, and if we get to a different stage where the church has to mean something different.
Yeah.
So that'd probably be it.
Nice. All right, Ben, is there anything I have not asked you that we cannot close this episode without you addressing. I don't want you to feel like anything was left on the table.
Gosh, man, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have covered a lot.
I would say you didn't ask me what you wanted me to bring with me to Kansas City for you to try that you maybe don't have access to all the time in the world of alcohol.
Wow. That's a great question. Okay, so here's my confession to you. Since I feel like you seem like a safe person. I'm way more of a wine guy than I am a beer guy. So I lived in Oregon and was, perpetually judged because I couldn't get around an IPA. And everybody told me what a horrible human I am. And I just never could get on board with it. So I would say, here's my confession to you. And I lay my cards on the table vulnerably.
Yes.
I'm a wheat beer guy.
Okay.
Which I know is not the manliest macho beer there is.
We don't yuck anybody else's yum.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. I think you're safe. So I'm the wheat beer guy. A good wheat beer to me is like refreshing, and I love all of that. So I remember I think at beer camp I was like, hey, the first night, like, are there any wheat beers? And they was like, no, not tonight. And I was like, okay, what's the closest to a wheat beer you got? It was like, I'll have that one. And so I tried all sorts of stuff, and a lot of it was really good. But that's my thing is like I think the IPA crowd was geeking out hard on all the stuff you guys are doing. That's like a level beyond me. I'm like hey, is there anything that's got a citrus note to it? That's where I'm at.
So are you familiar with Oberon?
The
beer,
is that a whiskey?
Not the wine. No, it's a beer.
Oh no, then I've not had it.
Wine. Oh my God. Okay. So Oberon. Okay. I'm going to have to, now this will actually require discipline on my part because it'll be gone here in Michigan by the time that I come to camp. So I'm going to hold some aside for you.
Oh, wow.
This is one of the 3 or 4 most important beers in the state of Michigan to come out of the state of Michigan. All right. Wow. So it's made by a producer called Bell's down in Kalamazoo. And it is last Monday was Oberon Day. All right. So It is only released in the summer, comes out in the spring, goes through the summer, closes off in the fall, and that's it. And then it's gone until the next year. And it's a ritualistic kind of day. It's more important here than St. Patrick's Day. Like it really is like that kind of level of importance.
Very cool.
And so I'm going to bring you a 6-pack of Oberon that you can either share or not share. But you'll at least be able to try one of the great American wheat beers in the world. And then maybe we'll pay attention to the wheat category when we're putting our list together. I know I tried some really good ones in the last time we were in Kansas City. So,
well, now I'm stoked. Now I was already excited. Now I'm really excited because now Ben's gonna show me something that's gonna blow my mind. That's awesome.
You're gonna have fun.
Well, hey Ben, I had asked you if you're like, hey, you got any websites or something you want me to promote? And you said nope. So. Nope. If someone is like digging you,
if you're in Grand Rapids, you can, I'll get you wine. We will come together and get wine or beer together. Like it's not, I'm the beverage director at this amazing beer shop called Siciliano's, that market that is one of the best independent beer retailers in the United States. It's been around since the early 90s. It's the reason that Founders exists. It's the reason that New Holland Brewing exists. Like they all started as 5-gallon buckets in the back of their store. So come find us at Siciliano's, and I'll make sure that you don't drink alone the entire time you're in Grand Rapids.
There you go. And
or see me at beer camp.
If they go to beer camp, they can meet you and see your curated selection in person.
Yeah. And we will find a beer for you, or I will have something else that you'll enjoy. And that includes gluten-free stuff. That includes non-alcoholic stuff. Rule number 1, there's always more room at the table. Whatever you're there to drink, we'll make sure that we have it for you. And if we don't, I'll go find it.
I will say that was what was cool is, because I wasn't like in the mainstream beer thing, I would ask them like, hey, what do you recommend? And it was probably you and a number of them would like give me cans of something, like, oh, I got this can, like check this out. And like, I don't remember what it was, but there was a lot of really good stuff.
We try to make sure everybody feels. This is not to make people. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. We want people to feel comfortable in their nerdydom. And if you're not a nerd in that area, just know that you're a nerd in something else, and you can just appreciate their nerdydom in that area.
Oh, I love it. That's great. Well, Ben, this has been a delight. I love your perspective. I love the way you continue to follow Jesus in new ways, and with your imagination and your poetry and around a table and with the spirits, and the way you talk about your kids is beautiful. I mean, all of it. I just think you're such a great example of how we can live out our faith with imagination, and you're doing a great job. So thanks for the example you're setting for the rest of us, and thanks for joining me on the pod today.
Yeah, thanks for the work you're doing on this pod and the other one, and just the example you guys. I was so encouraged to learn about you and to see you faithfully trying to continue to figure out what does it look like to follow Jesus in this space. And you have a lot of courage, and I'm really, really impressed by you. And that you happen to be doing it with a wine in your hand is even better.
Well, thank you. That does mean a lot. Well, this has been a delight. I hope you, dear listener, have enjoyed this episode as well and are inspired to go and try some new things and let that feral spirit flow. We'll see you on the next episode of Cabernet and Pray.